What if a single ship could decide the fate of an entire nation? What if 6 minutes at sea could erase 20 years of British naval pride? And what if the most powerful battleship ever built was doomed before its first battle even began? At 2:48 a.m. on May 24, 1941, the silence of the Denmark Strait was broken by a single voice shouting across the deck. Out of the mist, a colossal shape emerged, sleek, towering, unstoppable. It was the Bismarck, 50,000 tons of Nazi engineering designed for one purpose: to strangle Britain's supply lines and bring the empire to its knees. If it succeeded, the island would starve, and the war could end before America even entered. The hunt for the Bismarck had begun. In 1936, deep inside Germany, preparing for war, Adolf Hitler issued an order that would reshape naval history. He wanted a ship so advanced, so terrifying, that no enemy would dare challenge it at sea. It would be the ultimate symbol of Nazi power, his floating fortress of domination. When the Bismarck began construction at the Blohm+Voss shipyard in Hamburg, Germany, thousands of German workers toiled around the clock. They forged 13-inch armor plates, riveted steel hull sections the size of buildings, and built gun turrets so large they had to be hoisted by custom cranes. The ship stretched more than 800 feet long, 2.5 football fields of raw power. Her engines generated over 150,000 horsepower, driving her faster than most cruisers of the time. And her 8 15-inch guns could hurl shells weighing nearly a ton each, more than 20 miles. When she was launched in 1939, Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, hailed her as the pride of Germany. She had everything: her own bakery, a hospital, even a movie theater. To the 2,200 men who would soon crew her, the Bismarck felt like an invincible city of iron. But Captain Ernst Lindemann knew what no one dared to say aloud. This steel giant had one fatal flaw: it was alone. By the spring of 1941, the Bismarck was ready for her first test, a mission that would define her legacy and seal her fate. Operation Rheinübung was simple in theory, but deadly in execution. Break into the North Atlantic, destroy Britain's convoys, and starve the island into surrender. For Hitler, it was a strike at the very heart of the British Empire. For those aboard, it was a journey into the unknown. On May 18, 1941, under a cold northern sky, the Bismarck departed the port of Gotenhafen, escorted by the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. On deck, Captain Ernst Lindemann stood motionless, staring toward the open sea. He had no illusions. "We will return as heroes, or not at all," he told his officers quietly. The German plan was bold: slip undetected between Iceland and Greenland into the Atlantic, then strike the vulnerable convoys carrying food, oil, and ammunition to Britain. But Britain had eyes everywhere. Norwegian resistance agents spotted the Bismarck almost immediately and relayed her position to London. When Prime Minister Winston Churchill received the report, his face went pale. He knew exactly what it meant. If Bismarck broke loose into the Atlantic, she could sink 50 merchant ships before anyone could stop her. "Sink the Bismarck," he ordered, "no matter what it takes."
Strike.
Within hours, the Royal Navy launched the largest naval hunt in history. From Scapa Flow to Gibraltar, ships of every class raced to intercept. Battleships King George V and Prince of Wales, the carrier Victorious, and the battlecruiser Hood all converged on the Denmark Strait. The men aboard Bismarck knew they were being hunted, yet their confidence was unshaken. Steel met determination, and arrogance met destiny. The ocean was vast, but it could not hide them forever. The morning of May 24th, 1941, dawned cold and gray over the Denmark Strait. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the hunters had found their prey. On one side, the German battleship Bismarck and the cruiser Prinz Eugen. On the other, Britain's greatest pride, the HMS Hood and the newly built Prince of Wales. For the Royal Navy, it was a moment of vengeance and redemption. For the men aboard, it would become a nightmare. At 5:52 a.m., both British ships opened fire first. The roar of their 15-inch guns thundered across the strait, water columns rising like ghosts around the German vessels. But their shells fell short. The Bismarck adjusted her aim, her gunners cool and precise, each calculation exact to the meter. Then, at 6 a.m., came the shot that would echo through history. A single shell from the Bismarck arced high through the gray sky and pierced the Hood's thin deck armor. It plunged deep into her ammunition magazine. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the world split open. In less than 3 minutes, the mighty Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, was gone. Of her 1,418 crew, only 3 survived. The rest vanished with the ship into the freezing sea. The Prince of Wales, damaged and outgunned, retreated under a smokescreen, leaving the Bismarck victorious. But Captain Ernst Lindemann did not celebrate. He stood silently on the bridge as wreckage from the Hood burned on the horizon. He knew what was coming next, the fury of an empire. The Royal Navy would not rest until the Bismarck was sunk. The Bismarck had triumphed in the Denmark Strait, but her victory came with a wound that would doom her. During the brief clash, 3 shells from Prince of Wales had struck home. One of them ruptured a vital fuel tank. As the mighty battleship turned south, a slick of oil spread across the sea behind her, a trail no hunter could ignore. Captain Ernst Lindemann urged a return to port for repairs, but Admiral Gunther Lütjens overruled him. Orders from Berlin were clear: press on into the Atlantic and attack the convoys. The decision sealed their fate. Somewhere behind them, the Royal Navy was gathering, driven by rage and vengeance for the loss of the Hood. For 2 days, the British shadowed the German ship using radar, unseen but never far. The cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk followed at the edge of gun range, their operators watching glowing dots on radar screens. Each sweep told the same story. The Bismarck was still moving, still alive, still dangerous. Then, on the night of May 24th, the unthinkable happened. The Bismarck turned straight toward her pursuers. The British ships scattered, thinking they were under attack. But it was a feint, a desperate maneuver to shake the chase. In the confusion, the Bismarck slipped into a storm front and vanished. For 31 hours, the North Atlantic swallowed the most dangerous ship in the world. Panic rippled through British command. The Admiralty lost track. The Prime Minister demanded hourly updates. No one knew where she was or what she was about to do. But the ocean has a way of revealing its secrets. Somewhere beneath the clouds, fate was already closing in. For 31 hours, the Bismarck had vanished into the North Atlantic. The hunters searched in vain, until the morning of May 26, 1941, when a British reconnaissance plane from Coastal Command finally spotted her slicing through the gray water toward France. If she reached the port of Brest, she would be untouchable, protected by German aircraft and coastal defenses. But there was still time. Barely. The message raced to the Admiralty. The Bismarck had been found, yet most British warships were too far away or nearly out of fuel from the endless chase. Only one vessel was close enough to strike, the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal. Her pilots knew the odds. They would have to fly through a gale, find the enemy in the storm, and cripple her before nightfall. But their planes were laughably outdated. The ferry Swordfish, a slow, fabric-covered biplane from another era, was the only weapon they had left. These fragile aircraft could barely reach 90 miles per hour, yet they carried torpedoes that could sink giants. As the deck pitched beneath them, 15 Swordfish took off into the storm, vanishing one by one into the clouds. When they found the Bismarck, the sea erupted in chaos. The ship's anti-aircraft guns thundered, filling the air with steel and flame. The slow-moving Swordfish should have been easy prey, but they were too slow for the German gunners to track. Shells exploded far above them, while the old biplane swept in low, barely skimming the waves. 14 torpedoes missed, but the 15th, fired by Lieutenant John Moffett, hit the stern. The blast jammed Bismarck's rudder hard to port. Within moments, the pride of Germany could no longer steer. She turned helplessly in endless circles, her engines roaring but going nowhere. On the bridge, Captain Lindemann bowed his head. "We will fight to the last shell," he said, "but we cannot win." Around him, the sea grew darker as thunder rolled across the Atlantic. The hunters had crippled the beast. Tomorrow, they would end her. Through the night of May 26th, the crippled Bismarck drifted helplessly in the storm. Her rudder was jammed, her engines strained, and her crew exhausted. British destroyers closed in like wolves, launching torpedoes from the shadows. Explosions lit the sky, but the German ship refused to die. The sea roared, lightning flashed, and every man aboard knew what awaited them at dawn. At first light on May 27th, the horizon burned with the muzzle flashes of British guns. The battleships King George V and Rodney had arrived. This would not be a duel, it would be an execution. At 8:47 a.m., both ships opened fire from 4 miles away. Their salvos thundered across the Atlantic, slamming into the German Titan with crushing precision. Within minutes, Bismarck's main guns were destroyed. Her fire control systems were shattered, her bridge torn open. Shell after shell tore through her upper decks, twisting the superstructure into mangled steel. Yet still she floated, German engineering defying death itself. For more than an hour, the Royal Navy poured nearly 2,800 shells into the drifting giant. Finally, the order came from within. Open the seacocks, scuttle the ship. Seawater flooded her compartments as explosions rumbled deep inside. At 10:39 a.m., the Bismarck rolled to port, her flag still flying, and slipped beneath the waves. Of her 2,200 crew, only 114 survived. The rest went down with their ship. The terror of the Atlantic was no more. When the waves closed over the Bismarck on the morning of May 27, 1941, an entire chapter of naval warfare sank with her. She had ruled the Atlantic for only 8 days, but those 8 days changed everything. Her destruction marked the death of the battleship age and the birth of a new era ruled by carriers and submarines. For decades, navies believed in the gospel of armor and firepower, that a ship's strength came from its guns and steel. The Bismarck had both, yet even she could not survive the relentless coordination of aircraft, radar, and willpower. It wasn't brute force that destroyed her, it was evolution. The world had moved on. and she was left behind. In the days after her sinking, the Royal Navy combed the area for survivors. Only 114 men were rescued from the icy water. The rest, more than 2,000 souls, were gone. Many of them were barely 20 years old, serving a cause they didn't choose, fighting a war none of them truly understood. From that moment, the world's admirals knew the ocean had a new master. Power now came from the skies, not from steel monsters bound to the waves. And beneath those waves, the Bismarck slept, proud, broken, and eternal. The Bismarck story isn't only about war. It's about pride, progress, and change. Even the strongest giants fall when they refuse to adapt. Like the sea, life never stops moving. Those who cling to the past are swept away by the tide. True strength lies not in resisting change, but in learning to flow with it. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson do you take from the fall of the Bismarck? And if you love uncovering the hidden truths of history, subscribe to our channel and sail with us through the forgotten oceans of time.